Thanks, guys. You see everything on screen? Yeah. So give yourselves a hand. You know, nice looking audience here. Come on. All right. So I'm very biased. I'm a designer by training. I have, however, overseen hundreds of thousands of lines of code being shipped one way or another. So I'm going to talk to you about design-driven development, kind of a little term that I came up with, you know, borrowed, what have you, to talk about my process of thinking about applications. So first of all, who is this guy holding the mic in front of you today? I'll give you a quick background. Very early on, I had the opportunity as a preteen, as a 12-year-old, to intern at Paragraph. Many of you don't know what that is. Some of you that have been around for a little while do. It's the company that was responsible for the handwriting recognition on the Apple Newton back in the day. A lot of that company is what today is Evernote, so I'm sure you know that one. By 15, I was the youngest employee at Kinko's as a designer. Obviously no formal education at that point in design, but some talent, I guess. And by 16, I co-founded my first company. So after that very young age, I ran a user experience team at a .com, enterprise.com, called Spin Circuit. This was 12 years ago or so, back before user experience was really a concept. But managing complexity, talk about complicated enterprise products, that's where you have to actually think about different problems and structure things in usable ways. After that, I ran and sold a printing company, got a degree in computer and video imaging in that order, and started a design firm with offices in San Francisco, moved quickly, or rather opened the second office in LA and had development in Eastern Europe, and we grew at a pretty quick clip. A few years ago, I founded Keen, which is an e-commerce platform to enable the print industry to go online, which is a big trend. I'll talk about that in a second. And through this whole time, I advised startups on strategy, product strategy, and design. These things are interrelated, obviously. And from my perspective, they come first. So real quick, the obligatory infomercial. Oops, I think I went too fast. Let's go back. So what Keen is a large-scale, cloud-based e-commerce platform for print companies. Very large industry, 640 billion. That's about 18 times bigger than the video game industry. And it's quickly going online as far as originating orders and dealing with their customers. And a lot of these print companies are becoming marketing services providers. So they are the ones that own relationships with small businesses, and they're the ones that are starting to provide online marketing services as well to their clients. So what we've built over the course of the last 4 years and launched is a cloud-based application that allows print companies to come in, build multiple storefronts, very complicated products, and be able to run their entire shop in the cloud, including integrations with companies like Cafe Press, which are launching soon, and Mimeo, and others where they can actually become affiliates and resell products right within their account and basically run the entire business on the platform. So again, to give you a little perspective, the industry is about 1.5 times the size of the auto industry, is about 18% online at the moment. In the next 5 years, over 50% of the orders will come online. So that's kind of what we're chasing, and we have a lot of domain expertise there. So we actually started as a Rails application, quickly realized there are some issues with scaling to our extent, and we went to Scala. We had a really painful rewrite. So if you're interested in that, I can connect you with our head architect. He can tell you all about that. So how many of you have any experience with Scala or any interest in Scala? Yeah. Well, I'll definitely want to talk to you afterwards. So real quick, I'll talk to you about 4 things today. So principles of good design. So rather than give you a taste of design, I want to give you some taste to be able to know and be able to articulate what is good design. Design disciplines and being able to distinguish what the different areas of design are and what you actually may need for your application at any given point. What I describe as my design-driven development process, and working with designers or hiring designers, some ideas there. So some topics that a lot of engineering-founded, engineering-led startups, I feel I get questions from a lot. So we'll start with principles of good design. And I'm going to borrow from the best. Dieter Rams was a very famous industrial designer, still around. Apple has taken a lot of industrial design cues from him. He's established a lot of the principles that are being utilized today, and he has impeccable taste. He ran, for a very long time, he ran design for Braun and a lot of the products from the 60s and beyond. So he, in the early 80s, he saw design kind of getting away from people and going into the woods, and he wanted to come up with 10 principles of good design that could be used as a measuring stick for what is good design, and to be able to articulate and measure things against. So his words are better than mine, so I will use his words. So, good design is innovative. The possibilities for innovation are not by any means exhausted. Technological development is always offering new opportunities for innovative design. But innovative design always develops in tandem with innovative technology and can never be an end in itself. So, good design always takes advantage of the most current technology. Good design makes a product useful. A product is bought to be used. It has to satisfy certain criteria, not only functional, but also psychological and aesthetic. Good design emphasizes the usefulness of a product whilst disregarding anything that could possibly detract from it. Good design is aesthetic. The aesthetic quality of a product is integral to its usefulness because products we use every day affect our person and our well-being, but only well-executed objects can be beautiful. Good design makes a product understandable. It clarifies the product structure. Better still, it can make a product talk, or at best, it is self-explanatory. Good design is unobtrusive. Products fulfilling a purpose are like tools. They are neither decorative objects nor works of art. Their design should therefore be both neutral and restrained to leave room for the user's self-expression. Good design is honest. It does not make a product more innovative, powerful, or valuable than it really is. It does not attempt to manipulate the consumer with promises that cannot be kept. Good design is long-lasting. It avoids being fashionable and therefore never appears antiquated. Unlike fashionable design, it lasts many years, even in today's throwaway society. And these are words from 30 years ago. Good design is thorough, down to the last detail. Nothing must be arbitrary or left to chance. Care and accuracy in the design process show respect towards the consumer. Good design is environmentally friendly. Design makes an important contribution to the preservation of the environment. It conserves resources and minimizes physical and visual pollutions throughout the life cycle of the product. And good design is as little design as possible. Less but better because it concentrates on the essential aspects and the products are not burdened with non-essentials. Back to purity and back to simplicity. So now you can see a lot of, especially physical objects, you can judge within this criteria, and then you can now articulate why they make you feel good about the product. So, take a quick glance. There will be a quiz at the end, and prizes. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to give you a few good quotes about design. So, design is intelligence made visible. Good design is obvious. Great design is transparent. Design is not just what it looks like, design is how it works. Our friend Steve Jobs. And my personal favorite on this slide at least, the difference between a designer and developer when it comes to design skills is the difference between shooting a bullet and throwing it. All right, now, a little video, and I want to get your opinion on this, so pay attention. So that was cool, right?
Yeah.
No, totally uncool. Because this is what an engineer would build, right? This is the Rube Goldberg machine. Now, what a designer would build is this, right? So there's a difference, right? So you're building for human consumption, and you have to always keep that in mind, that you know what the sausage factory is, but your user doesn't know and doesn't care. They only care about the problem. So in that case, he wanted to flip this page. It's kind of comical, right? But I wanted to show this extreme example that, yeah, you can build something really complicated and overbuild it, but obviously that's not for everybody. So why that? Why I say that? So your application, right, is actually, we have data, around it we have some logic, and we have an interface, right? Well, how a user sees it is they see an interface, and Jeff Raskin, who kind of invented the Apple Macintosh, the Macintosh project, said that as far as the user is concerned, the interface is the product, right? Because they see an interface, and then they see magic somewhere inside it, right? So 95% of the world does not understand how programming works and does not care. Probably more than that. So keep that in mind when you're designing for human consumption. There's a term that I like to use that a lot of applications, and don't take it the wrong way, but it's designed by engineers for engineers. And you see a lot of products that are very frustrating to use because everything is really built in a very straightforward manner where it's very data-driven, very pragmatic, but it's not designed around use cases. It's designed around features lined up in a nice grid, and that's not how people actually use applications. So let's talk about the need for consistency real quick. So when somebody says something looks professional, what they really mean that it looks clean and consistent in design, right? This is a very important factor. Because consistency sends a message of quality and builds trust, right? So let's look at a couple of examples. So, Mint.com, Jason Patorti, very, very sought-after designer these days, talks about this a lot. And basically, they had a challenge. The challenge was they wanted to go to consumers with a new brand and say, trust us with all of your banking logins, right? Good luck, right? So how do you get people to trust you with all their banking logins? You really have to make a solid first impression. It has to be an impression of trust, and all of that is about how you organize the information, cleanliness, consistency, and attention to detail. Because if there's anything out of place, you lose a lot of trust. Now, if you look at, let's say Sephora, right? Sells a bunch of dirt, wax, and oil, right, in the form of cosmetics, and gets an average of 60 to 80% markup over wholesale, right? So they're creating perception of value. So, and you think that's bad, right? Here's some other industries. Clothing has an average markup of 100 to 350%. Furniture, 2 to 400%. Shoes, 100 to 500% markup. Eyeglasses, 800 to 1,000% markup. And prescription medicine, 200 to 5,600% markup over wholesale. So to be able to create that perception of value, it's all about design and messaging and branding. So very, very important factor. Much more important than, let's say, whatever particular technology you choose to build your application in. So, and design is not art, right? Designers and artists are completely different people. So here's a great quote that I really like. Pardon my French. Art is like masturbation. It is selfish and introverted and done for you and you alone. Design is like sex. There's someone else involved. Their needs are just as important as your own. And if everything is done right, both parties are happy at the end. So when you're designing, you're in a problem-solving discipline. You have to have a problem statement, and you have to think of it as a solution to a problem. This is not art. This is not about self-expression, because it's unlikely that your aesthetic is going to appeal to somebody else's problem, unless you're in the art world. So let's talk about design disciplines. Let's see. So first and foremost, just like when you guys go to meetups and everybody comes up to you and says, I need a technical co-founder, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard things like, we need a designer, or everything is ready except we need to create, accept user experience, right? Or things like that. So let's talk about the specific different disciplines in design so you can articulate better what kind of designer you need, because just like there's a big difference between a front-end developer, back-end developer, and a DBA, and a QA person, etc., there are probably even more shades in the design world, on the design side of things. So a graphic designer is probably the oldest discipline in the design world. And think of it, shortcut obviously branding, right? If you're working on web apps and mobile apps, and I assume most of you here are, you still need branding, right? You need to create a brand that's consistent, the color scheme, the identity, the logo, etc. So you would go to a graphic designer for branding, for illustration, for any kind of typography, any kind of packaging. That's your person there. User experience is the core of application development, of any kind of software, etc. And this is this is kind of a hybrid discipline. It's a person with graphic design skills and aesthetic feel, and it's also a technical person. It's a person that has psychology background, that can understand the user's needs and can design for intent. And basically, I just said it's sense intent, right? You have to understand what is the problem, who's the users, what are they trying to get done, and how do we build it. So UI or visual designers then translate user experience. So the output from the user experience process, for example, would be a wireframe or a prototype with all the flows, with all the interaction already worked out. All you have to do is add spin and polish an actual backend for it to function as an application. So it always has to start with that. The UI visual person would put the polish on. So it's a combination of a strong visual aesthetic, also a person that understands the design principles of the given medium. There's a whole world of difference in designing for a web application, a mobile web application, an iOS application, an Android application. They all have their own design principles, and the person designing the user interface has to be expert in that given medium that you're going for. Very, very important. And ultimately, they have to surface functionality, so they have to kind of show off the application. Front-end developer is the bridge between the design world and the development world. And it also has to be a person that has design aesthetic and an eye, but can also speak the right technical language and be able to implement the user interface and hand it off for logic implementation, or connect the dots, either which way it goes. And then, of course, don't forget about your marketing people. These are the people that will come up with the copy that goes into the application. They will come up with a sales strategy, and copy is much more, well, not much more important, but it's very, very important inside an application. How you talk to your customers, how you talk to your users, and what kind of tone you use, and consistency in language, don't overlook that. And they're the voice of the customer. This is the person that should be going out there, touching with the customer, getting feedback, and taking it back to the rest of the team. Obviously, that can get much more complex as you build out support, and you build out formal marketing, and all this and that, but this is the bridge. Okay? So, design-driven development process, the reason I say it that way is, again, I'm biased, I'm a designer, but it's design goes first. So, I think I've given you a good preface, but step one is a problem definition. Unless you're working on a core technology, where the problem is, I want to make a faster database, or a new communication method, or something like that, if you're designing for a consumer, or you're designing an enterprise application, you're designing for a set of problems that somebody has. You're not trying to give them vitamins, you're trying to give them painkillers. So you have to define your problem and say, here's the exact problem, here's what I want to solve. Next step is to actually sketch. So I spend a lot of time in this step to actually sit down on a piece of paper first, sketch out different screens, say, okay, user one would want to do this and this and that. So let's see, what's the flow through the application for us to actually achieve this particular goal. And iterating through that, 5, 6 versions in, then you'll go to high level sketches, which are basically wireframe or HTML prototypes. You can use applications like Azure or Rise to actually create mockups. And this is where you can make a lot of decisions before you write a single line of code, and you can actually feel how the application will work. So when you actually hit the ground running, there's none of this pivoting, schmivoting, rewriting code, all of this. If you have a problem that you've defined and you have a prototype that feels good in solving that problem, you're that much ahead of the game. So next is then the user interface design, right? This is where you come up with your branding. This is where you figure out, okay, we want to use blue because 80% of American corporate identity is blue because it's a trusted color, or we want to use red because we want to be bold, or we want to use green because we want to feel fresh. You know, there's a lot of psychographics and all these things come into play, all the design principles and all the design theory, where you would start putting it into the application and coloring that, creating that setting for it. Then of course, you can actually, you can start doing this in parallel, but this is a good handoff point. If you're doing things in serial, this is a good handoff point to actually know, okay, this is exactly what we need to build, or at least the first version of it. Now we can actually structure the architecture behind it. And then front-end development, of course, to actually take those wireframes in the user interface and cut up the screens and the views. And then the application development itself, and then actually show it to users, and they tell you suck, and you start over, hopefully not, and then you get that customer feedback, right? So then you take that customer feedback, and then you rinse and repeat. All right, so this is what I call the design-driven development process. You can give it a different name, but this is how I like to think about it from my perspective. Right? So when somebody comes to me and says, we already have everything done, except we just need the user experience, that means, okay, we're going to throw everything away and we're going to start over. Now, a word on focus groups. No successful product has ever come out of a focus group. Ever. Right? Every single product that you can think of that stands the test of time, Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings, Herman Miller furniture, what have you, Apple products, like these are physical products, and a lot of interfaces and a lot of design principles that are pioneered, they are qualitative improvements, they're not data-driven, right? You don't go to a doctor to, if you have a medical problem, you go to a doctor. You don't ask 10 of your friends what they think, right? So what you need to do is define the problem and let designers do their job. This is a designer's job, is to solve the problem. And the way you evaluate the designer is not based on what kind of drop shadows or what have you that they use in the designs, but how they solve the problem. And that's what, when you're interviewing designers, think about that, right? So, good segue. So, what designers need, right? Just like, developers, good developers are a hot commodity right now, right? And all the companies are fighting for them, trying to give them everything they need, whether it's a fun environment or what have you. I'll give you a couple of core things that make designers feel good. And as you know, anybody good at what they do, they don't really care about the exact amount of money. They care about the environment they're in. They care about interesting problems to solve, right? Designers like interesting problems to solve. They want a creative and open-minded environment, right? Because you can't be too data-driven and you can't be too process-driven if you're going to innovate. So the design process, it's very important to have an open mind and be able to manage creativity. It's a little bit different. And ultimately, you want a strong voice in the company or product direction, right? Especially in technology products, it's all about the product. And designers need to have a seat at the table. After all, they want a little bit of power, right? First you get the power, then you get the money. Right. So, how would you like your design? So this is the typical value circle. Good thing you can see it here. So you can pick two, right? So if you want, just like in development, there's a lot of parallels. If you want something fast and cheap, for example, it will be ugly, rushed, and careless. If you want something fast, cheap, and great, sorry, it doesn't exist. Or same thing for free. Fast, cheap, and free doesn't exist, or free and great doesn't exist. Fast and free exists, it's called trash. Cheap and great is never on time, so keep that in mind, okay? And then ultimately, design is core, right? Here is your startup. You certainly want to know what business you're in, right? You have a person that's at least doing the operations, if nothing else. You certainly have engineering, especially in this context. You have to build something. But ultimately, design is that third leg of the stool. And you really can't outsource it. So just like a software company can't be a couple of business guys or product guys, and they outsource everything offshore, right? You can't outsource your core product. Same thing, design is part of your core product. All right? So I will close with that. Thank you. And I'll take your questions.